This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of September 8th, 2024. Feeling much better this week. Content authenticity statement. 100% of this week's newsletter was generated by me, the human. In the video version, you will see some stuff in Google Gemini, but honestly, not a whole lot, because we're not talking about generative AI specifically this week. Instead, we're talking about something, well, a little bit different. What's on my mind this week? The basics of how to launch a podcast from scratch. This morning, I was at the dojo observing. It's not cleared for physical activity yet. And my martial arts teacher, Mark Davis of the Boston Martial Arts, had asked me this intriguing question. If you were going to start from scratch with absolutely nothing, how would you launch a podcast today? What are the white belt basics? And this is a really good question, because one of the things that we get caught up in, particularly if you've been doing something a while, is forgetting what the white belt basics, what the beginner stuff looks like, because you're so deep into the intricacies of the thing. And what makes this question interesting to me is that I've done cold starts before. There's a reasonably tried and true process for doing this, for doing a cold start where, you've got nothing except an idea. There's no existing, infrastructure in place. How do you do it? So today, let's incorporate our latest and greatest knowledge to help Mark and anyone like you who is starting a podcast or thinking about starting a podcast, how to get up and running. Part 1, podcast strategy. Before you do anything else, be absolutely clear on 2 things. Number 1, why are you doing a podcast? And why a podcast in particular? There's a bunch of different types of content you can make. Podcasts are not especially good at attracting new audiences, unless you're like Joe Rogan. They're very, very good at retaining an audience and deepening a relationship with that audience, but they're not a great attractor of new audiences in general, because the format of the medium requires some commitment, right? Even if it's a 5-minute podcast, that's still a lot more commitment than, say, a 30-second TikTok reel. Number 2, who is your ideal audience? Who do you expect to listen to and love your show? Think of all the major elements of an ideal customer profile: demographics, psychographics, needs, pain points, motivations, goals, and why someone would care about your podcast. You need to be absolutely crystal clear on those things. It is perfectly fine if you're doing a podcast just for fun, just for yourself or maybe a handful of friends. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a fun show to do. But you want to be clear about that is your goal, just to have some fun. It is also perfectly fine if you want to use a podcast to grow your business, to upsell existing customers, to retain your customers. But you want to be equally clear about that as well. You've got to have your purpose nailed down. Think of it this way. There's a huge difference between cooking dinner for yourself and opening a restaurant. Both of those things involve the preparation of food, but they have very different organizational structures and levels of commitment and how you deal with other people. So you want to be absolutely positively crystal clear about your performance, about your purpose, why you're doing the podcast. Second, once you are clear about your purpose, understand what success looks like. If you're making a podcast for yourself, the success is something you enjoy making, something you enjoy listening to. I know plenty of people who do music podcasts, and they could care less if anyone else listened. They just want to make essentially mixtapes for themselves. Nothing wrong with that. That is perfectly awesome. If you're making a podcast for your, say in Mark's case, your existing martial arts students, your green belts, your brown belts, your black belts, success is a high listenership rate among your students. And perhaps what you're sharing on the podcast showing up in the classroom. If you are talking about, Tehodoki wrist escapes, and you share an insight on the show, you ideally like to see that show up on the dojo floor in students' movement. If you're making a podcast for the general public, success might be new appointments at your dojo. It is not inconceivable to attract new audiences with a podcast. It's just less likely than other content formats. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. because it does happen if the show is good enough and it's marketed well enough. Whatever your purpose is, your performance, the measurement, should have some kind of quantifiable outcome that maps to the purpose. And if you don't have that, then deciding what to do and how to do it for your show is going to be very, very challenging. So be crystal clear. This is why I'm doing it. And this is how I'm going to measure success. Part 2, podcast tactics. When we're building a podcast or any other content, we have a 4-part basic structure. Create, distribute, activate, measure. Create. You make the stuff. How do you make the stuff? Distribute. How do you publish the stuff so that other people can get at it? Activate. How do you get people to the stuff? And measure and see if people got to the stuff. This structure is sort of the overall tactical map of your content, of your podcast, of how you're going to do this thing. So let's dig into each of the 4 legs on this stool. Number 1 is create. We need an execution map for the cadence of our stuff. And for this, I most often recommend YouTube's 3H content pillar strategy, Hero, Hub, Help. This is something that YouTube published 10 years ago now, and it's still a good format. It's still a good framework. Hero content are big, expensive pieces you publish infrequently that are like quarterly. These are big productions. You put a lot of time and effort into creating a lot of production value, multiple camera shoots maybe. Often hero content is big thought leadership stuff. In my world, it would be like a keynote address. Stuff that answers the question why. And ideally down the road, if you're going to make tiers for your content, this would be the stuff people pay for, right? This would be the stuff that's so good, people are going to pay money for it. The second H is hub content. These are medium-sized pieces you publish regularly, but not frequently, like on a monthly basis. These mid-sized monthly pieces often answer the question, what? What is the thing that you're talking about? And then help content. This is small, high-frequency pieces you publish regularly and frequently, like weekly or even daily. They have low production value. I mean, you're going to shoot them on your smartphone or whatever, or are carved out of older, bigger pieces. These weekly or daily pieces often answer the question of how. So, for example, if I was running a martial arts school podcast, I might make my hero content something that takes a tremendous amount of time and research, like the intricate history of a system or cross-cultural comparison set of techniques. I might set up my Kung Fu friend and my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu friend, and we might look at takedowns and maybe make a 45-minute or 60-minute or 90-minute production of, hey, here's how different martial arts systems address this kind of situation. Or here's how the history and the lineage of the Togakure family traveled through time and how these things occurred. You're going to spend a lot of time in libraries and doing research and stuff. And that hero content probably is going to take multiple forms. I might make my hub content something like teachings from a seminar or a boot camp, where I spend 45 to 60 minutes on a specific technique or topic, a deep dive that someone could get a lot of value from. It'd be a seminar, like a mini seminar almost. And you might do this once a month. This month, the theme of our hub content for the podcast could be Kyogi kata from the Kotoryu. And here's why this technique matters, and here's how it works. And then here's some variations and stuff like that. The things you would teach in a class that a paying student would attend would be hub content. And then I might make my help content something like individual lessons from a class. Here's why bending your knees on this technique is the difference between winning and losing. Here's a common mistake people make during this kind of technique. For a podcast, I would also strongly consider a seasonal approach these days, where you do a defined batch of content around a specific topic for a specific period of time, as opposed to having just a never-ending podcast. You might, for a martial arts school in my tradition, do a season of the podcast on the grappling from the Gyoko family lineage, or a season of the podcast on the secret sword fighting method of the Kukishin family lineage. If you were to put all this together, a season of a podcast for a martial arts school might look something like this, where Episode 1 is your hub content, the what. It's a medium-sized piece of content launching the season in which you explain what the topic is, why it matters to some people, how people should think about it. This season of the podcast, we are going to look at the Truden and scroll of this school, or we're going to look at maybe even just this type of technique, this Kyogi kata from Kotoryu. And here's kind of how it evolved, and here's how we teach it in class and things like that. Episodes 2 through 9 would be health content. It might be this series of small pieces of content that look at the topic in granular bits, adding color, dissecting things that go wrong. Hey, here's the number one thing on this content. People get the footwork wrong. They step off at a 45-degree angle, and then they keep going in that direction instead of pivoting 45 degrees to go back for the second step to create a lot more distance. That would be maybe episode 2. Episode 3 would be, here's how the riding reflex in the body works, so that when you come back in on this technique, it's taking advantage of the body's natural desire to have equilibrium, that change in balance. If you don't get that right, the technique doesn't work. In episode 4, hey, here's how this particular hit off balances the person, and here's why people do it wrong. They hit too high, or they hit too low, or they hit at the wrong time. So episodes 2 through 9 would be taking this thing apart. And then episode 10 would be the hero piece, the season finale, in which we see the big picture. We see how all the pieces fit together. Maybe we see it dramatized as here's how the technique would look if someone was being mugged in an alley, and here's what it would look like in the modern time. Here's maybe you get out the old samurai armor, and here's how it looked originally on the battlefield, and you have the people clambering around this armor, and it'd be a lot of production value. It would be a lot of effort to button it all up, but it would be a really satisfying conclusion that puts a bow on the topic. And so it's hub, a bunch of help content, and then the hero content. And that season would be, in the example I'm using, this Kyogi kata. That would be a bundle of content that you would then release as a podcast, and so on and so forth. Now, how do you decide what content to make? Because that's the general approach I would take today. Hero hub help, seasonal content, and following the basic outline. In terms of what you make, right? This is where knowing your customer is absolutely essential. I would take all the data I have about my ideal customers, my current customers, and build a synthetic ideal customer profile, and then ask questions of my synthetic customer using generative AI. I ask the synthetic customer how long each show should be, perhaps, or what topics they do and don't want to hear about, what channels they spend the most time on. So let's go ahead and switch over into Google's Gemini, and we will just make sure we're in the right model here. Our settings are appropriately set. And so what I've done is I've taken the Boston Martial Arts Center's data from Google Analytics, from Google reviews and things like that, and had it build an ideal customer profile. Say, great. I'd like to ask our synthetic customer, Sarah, some questions. First, what kinds of podcasts, if any, does Sarah already listen to? Based on Sarah's persona, some educated guesses about the kinds of podcasts she might already listen to: marketing and business strategy, leadership and productivity, mindfulness and wellness, confidence and empowerment, true crime and investigative journalism, pop culture and entertainment, and so on and so forth. Now, it is guessing based on a lot of the data from the Boston Martial Arts Center Google Analytics account, because you do get interests, kinds of things people are interested in based from Google Analytics. So we're using that here. So I could say, great, I'm thinking about making a seasonal podcast, batches of 10 episodes, for my martial arts school, the Boston Martial Arts Center. What topics should I think about that would resonate well with Sarah? So now we're going to ask Sarah, hey, what should we do for us? Self-defense and empowerment, building confidence, debunking self-defense myths, fitness and wellness, things like that. Okay. I have a specific expertise in the Kotoryu family lineage of channels. There's a kata, shogi, from this system that teaches us a lot of useful lessons about balance, timing, distancing, and how attackers think and what. How could I create a 10-episode series about this kata, starting with an introduction to it, 8 episodes of specifics about it, and a 10th season finale episode for it that would let me demonstrate my expertise that provide incredible value. Can't spell that. Incredible value and education and entertainment to Sarah. So now I'm saying, hey, I know that here's my content strategy that I know. Here's what the ideal customer profile is interested in. And then digging into this and coming up with some of the topics, some of the, what the episode should be about. So this is an example where I'm taking the ideal customer profile and matching it with my curriculum information, to try and take what I know I have, what I know I'm expert in, and blend it with what the customer cares about. One of the biggest problems in podcasting and in all content is we're too self-centered. We're too selfish. It's all about us. Hey, I want to showcase, how awesome I am at this technique. And that's fine. That's human nature. But we can use generative AI to help us pivot our point of view, see things from the customer's perspective. And in this case, I've taken this synthetic persona of Sarah derived from Google Analytics data and taken my thing that I want to talk about and pivoted it to something that Sarah might be more receptive to. Now, if you want to know more about this particular process, we spent an entire live stream episode on this, on the Trust Insights live stream. And now there's a link in the newsletter that will take you right to it. It's on for AI podcast growth. So that's sort of the what to make in terms of the content. How do you make the content? What do you use to make the content with? Here's my top piece of advice. Unless you have a compelling, defined, specific reason not to, every podcast should start as video. Every podcast should start as video. Here's why. Video is the richest form of content. This is something I've been saying for decades now. Using a framework like the Trust Insights Video First Content Framework, if you start with video, you have the ability to make every other piece of content from that video. So no matter what my podcast is about, even as a talking head like this one, right? I would start with video. How to record a great video show is outside the scope of this issue of the newsletter, but there's no shortage of content on YouTube and all over the place for how to up your game when it comes to creating video. I will say, today's modern smartphone, if you have like an iPhone 13 or better, if you have a Google Pixel 7 or better, if you have a Samsung Galaxy S22 or better, you've got a pro camera. Right? You've got a professional quality camera. What you probably don't have is decent lighting. What you probably don't have is decent microphones. What you probably don't have is training to get good results out of it. But you've probably got the gear. And again, there's so much content on the web about how to make good video. I'll invest some time doing some research on that. Once you have video, then you use today's modern tools to transform it. If you are on a budget that's not robust, there's free alternatives for a lot of stuff, and then there's the stuff that if you have a budget, you should definitely use. So I have this broken into two lists. If you have a decent production budget, we're talking $200 a month or more, I would use Adobe Creative Cloud, particularly Adobe Premiere, which is what I edit all my content in, and Adobe Express to do thumbnails and video summaries and stuff. I would use a transcription tool like Fireflies to do transcripts because Premiere's transcription service is terrible. I would use a tool like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, the paid versions, to do generative AI stuff like summaries of episodes. I would use a tool like Opus Clip to do social media clips of a video I create. So I have little pieces of the content I can share. I would use a hosting service like Libsyn for podcast audio hosting because their distribution platform is pretty awesome. I'd use YouTube for video hosting. That's free. If you have a very small budget, I would use DaVinci Resolve to do the video editing and conversion. It's free with some limits. I would use the open source whisper.cpp to do the transcripts. Its quality is very good, but it is a pain in the ass to set up. For generative AI, if you need something that's absolutely free, I would use anything LLM or plus Mistral Nemo plus Cobalt CPP, which is also a pain in the ass to set up. You can use the free versions of ChatGPT and Google Gemini as well. Those are fine too, the free version, with the caveat that if you're doing something that is proprietary and confidential, you can't use the free versions because your stuff's no longer private. I would use the free version of Canva to do things like video thumbnails. I would host both my newsletter and my podcast on Substack, and then I would host the video on YouTube. Your workflow, broadly speaking, should be create and produce your video first, get that fully baked, then convert the video to audio, then turn the audio into transcripts, and then turn the transcripts into summaries. And when I say convert into summaries, what I'm talking about is taking the transcript from an episode, saying, turn this into a one-page cheat sheet or something like that, something that lets your content have handles that people can distribute more easily. The second leg of the stool is distribute. We've created the content. Now we got to distribute it. Where do we put the stuff? Where do we put our content? The goal of any content marketing, including a podcast, is to get our content in the hands of people. To accomplish this goal, we need to publish where people are. As much as I would love to say, we can just create the content and it's easily findable. No, it's not how that works anymore. For podcasts specifically, what is the single biggest way people discover podcasts today? Do you know the answer? YouTube. People discover podcasts on YouTube. And then secondarily on services like Spotify and things like that. But YouTube is the discovery engine for podcasts. It's something that Edison Research came out with a couple of years ago. Sounds Profitable has reiterated it in a lot of their shows. It's YouTube. So if you have a decent production budget, again, you want to host your podcast audio on a service like Libsyn because it will allow you to distribute that podcast to multiple services like Spotify, which is one of the biggest podcast podcast listening platforms. You want a website. You don't already have one. I would recommend a service like WP Engine for that. Your videos have got to be on YouTube, and put the podcast newsletter on Substack. If you have a very small budget, then put everything on Substack and on YouTube. That'd be the two channels. If you have no money at all, those are the places I would put it. I would publish my podcast videos on YouTube, ensuring every episode is marked as a premiere when you publish it. That helps people see it, existing subscribers, to be reminded it exists. Make sure that you load a closed captions file because YouTube's auto captioning not so great, especially for something like the martial arts where you're going to be using terms in multiple languages. Someone talking about the Togakure family lineage, YouTube's caption is just going to hose that. So you want to have, with every video, you want to make sure you have a thumbnail that's easy to read, and basically all the basic YouTube best practices to ensure discovery. YouTube publishes a guide. It's a creator's guide. It's free. You can grab it and read it. I would then load and schedule my audio podcast to drop at exactly the same time as the video. As with the video, ensure you've got cover art and other metadata to make sure your show look as good as it can look. If you're using a podcast distribution service like Libsyn, that service will handle the distribution of the show to all the major podcast networks. I would have the blog content, summaries, newsletter supporting each issue also drop at the same time. This is orchestration, getting the content to everyone at the same time. Speaking of which, choose a distinct date and time each day or week for when your content will appear and stick to it. I can't tell you the number of times over the last 10 years when I've asked an audience on stage, I'll say, hey, when was Seinfeld on? And anywhere from a third of the audience to all of the audience will just shout back, Thursdays at 9 on NBC. Seinfeld hasn't been on the air for more than 30 years. And yet people have that schedule so ingrained in their heads that great content, their content, will be available on NBC on Thursdays at 9. They remember it more than 3 decades later. So publish at a consistent time. This newsletter comes out Sunday mornings is when it's scheduled for. It's typically 6 to 6:30 a.m. Eastern time. Every week, that's when this content comes out, because I want you to expect it then. That way, if you don't get it, it's like, hey, is Chris in the hospital? The third pillar is activate. It's the third leg of the table when it comes to podcast tactics. Activation. By activation, I mean getting people to the show. Build it and they will come. Worked in podcasting in 2004. But after 2004, that stopped working. A podcast is an information product, and you have to market it like pretty much every other product. That means creating social media content, which is why I recommend tools like Descript or Opus Clip to create short-form versions of your content. Creating an email newsletter to remind people of your content. Take your podcast, make sure it is available in email form. There's a summary saying, hey, the latest episode is out. Here it is. Here's what it's about. Using generative AI to summarize that episode. And here's what you're going to hear in this episode. Leverage your existing network to share your content. Your video shorts that you build with Opus Clip should be on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And they should all be driving people back to the newsletter. So from the newsletter, then you can get them to subscribe to the podcast on whatever channel they prefer. The heart and soul of this whole thing is the newsletter. You want people subscribing to it so that you have the ability to reliably reach them. If you're a martial arts teacher, like my teacher Mark, how well do you know your students? How well do you know their social media presence and other forms of influence? Do they work at the Boston Police Department? Could they help share the show there? How well are you recommending that they consume and share the content you're creating if it's valuable to them? Maybe you do a podcast season on martial arts techniques for law enforcement, and then you go to all your students who are in law enforcement and say, hey, share this with your departments. Maybe you do a season on martial arts techniques for nonviolent crisis intervention in clinical settings. So then you share that. You do a podcast season on martial arts techniques for teachers and educators. And then you figure out who in your school or your audience is an educator, and you have them share it. The reality is that today, the most scarce resource the average content creator faces, it actually isn't time, it's attention. In the pocket of almost every person alive is this entertainment machine with a million choices, a billion choices on it. Our audiences are one tap away from something else, from forgetting we exist. So we need to make sure we are leveraging every possible avenue of recommendation and referral to get attention to our content. In every piece of content, if your purpose is to get more people to consume it, you've got to blatantly ask people to share it. People are so distracted today, so all over the place. I've seen people walk into into traffic like this, and they're on their phone walking the traffic. As marketers, we have to be bold in telling people what to do. Hey, if you like this episode, please share it with 2 friends. Hey, if you like this episode, please email it to 3 relatives. Whatever the thing is, you have to tell people shamelessly and boldly, this is what to do, because we're all like this and we all are distracted. If you have budget, consider using paid media, advertising, to support your content. Again, if you did a great job with your ideal customer profile, you can ask that profile what ads they would respond well to, and then use generative AI to create those ads and publish them. So we go back to our ideal customer profile and say, hey, great, I want to create some Google ads that I can use to reach someone like Sarah and persuade her to subscribe to my podcast, which is hosted on Substack? Give me 5 headlines and descriptions for Google Ads to advertise on a podcast to Sarah. And what we see here is we have 5 different ads for this. Now, score each ad against Sarah's ideal customer profile. How well does each ad address her needs, pain points, goals, and motivations? We're going to have the model evaluate its own stuff. And it's doing a score of 1 to 5, which is fine. So our ads scored like 3 or 4. Not great. Okay. Now, revise our 5 ads to score as high as possible. Especially keep in mind, Sarah doesn't necessarily know our martial art or the jargon or language that refine the ads to score as high as possible against what she cares. And now we have a new set of ads, and we have much higher scores. This is how I would do it. If I had budget, I'd absolutely be using generative AI to create ads, to publish those ads, take copy and paste the stuff into my ads tool. And in terms of where I would advertise, I would run ads in support of my show, but I'd send them to the Substack so I could capture them on an email list. That way, I'm not spending money to try and bring someone back over and over again. Once I catch their email, then I have a way of reaching them, and I don't need to spend ad dollars on that person anymore. The last leg of the stool is measurement. How do we know we succeeded? This goes back to our strategy. We were clear with our strategy up front that measuring its effectiveness should be straightforward. You can, and people should, use the built-in measurement tools and services like Libsyn and YouTube and Instagram, etc., to see how much audience they're reaching. Tools like Google Analytics. These are attention numbers. You also want to have a meaningful outcome beyond just attention, although attention certainly does help when you're just getting started out. One of the most valuable and simple ways to measure a podcast is to simply ask people when you interact with them, hey, how did you hear about us? Or what made you come in today? If your podcast is never, ever part of that answer, then you know you're not reaching new people. If your goal is to retain existing students, then you can simply ask them, what did you think of the most recent episode? What key point resonated most with you? What did you learn about Kyogi Kata for the most recent episode? What else would you like to hear on the show? It's, again, goes back to your purpose. Why did you do the podcast to begin with? And then with what you measured, does it fit reality? Part 3, outcomes. As with all content creation, expect podcast success to be a multi-year endeavor. Years to get to be successful. When you look at all the big creators, it's a hockey stick laying down. So it's very, 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 very slow growth and then not very slow growth. It will take you a lot of time and a lot of commitment to become proficient at each of the stages we've talked about. And it will take time for audiences to accept and then expect content from you. Once you've proven that they can trust you, that you can deliver content on a regular and frequent basis that serves their needs, you'll start to see real growth in your content creation efforts. But think of it like getting a black belt. It's going to take a while. We could, and I have, go to exceptional depth on each of these topics, but my teacher asked for the basics. This is the basics of launching a brand new podcast. Create video. Transform it into as many formats as possible. Publish and distribute it. Get people to it and measure it. It's a white belt set of techniques to master. There is so much more to podcasting after this, but as with life on the dojo floor, if you can't get the white belt techniques down, put aside the notions of trying out the black belt techniques. It's not going to work out well. You've got to be proficient at what's in front of you first. All right, what else happened this week? Was a short week for content on my channels for obvious reasons. I'm recuperating from surgery. However, did have a lot of fun this week on the Trust Insights live stream looking at generative AI for content personalization. So go check that out. And then I did an episode of Marketing Over Coffee talking about true augmented generation and politics and stuff. So all stuff that's a lot of fun to check out. Let's talk about jobs. Who's hiring this week? Category Insights Manager at Freudenberg Home and Cleaning Solutions, Data Analyst at Verisoft, Data Model Expert at Avenue Code, Director of Data Science at Torchlight, Lead Data Analyst at Albertsons Media Collective, Manager of Digital Analytics and Data Enablement at Indegene, Reporting and Analytics Manager at Blackstone Consulting, Senior Data Analyst at Excellion Partners, Senior Data Analyst at U.S. News and World Report, Senior Data Analyst at Cash App Compliance, Senior Data Scientist of Marketing Measurement at Petco, Senior Software Engineer at W Promote, and VP of Internal Audit at Fannie Mae. That's a tough job right there. Upcoming events. I am headed to Cleveland. I'm more excited than for the Marketing AI Conference this week. This is one of my favorite times of the year. It is summer camp for nerds, although it's more like back to school this year. So I'll be in Cleveland this week with some friends, with Katie from Trust Insights. We're going to have a lot of fun. I'm going to be talking about open models and why they're so important. Following that, I have a workshop in Philadelphia with Lab Products Association, then Inbound here in Boston the week after. Then Marketing Process B2B Forum, the social media marketing world, Content Jam in Chicago. So it's the calendar is filling up fast. If you would like me at your events, now is the time to say so, because my calendar is filling up really, really fast. And I would love to come talk to you and your team or your audience about AI and all the things around it and ways that we can apply AI and make it useful. That is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found it as helpful as I think hopefully my martial arts teacher will. And I will talk to you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you want to know when new videos are available, hit the bell button to be notified as soon as new content is live.